Hi, and thanks for tuning in to our presentation on Canada's Low Carbon Assets through Life Cycle Assessment Initiative, or LCA Square, and with a particular focus on our Life Cycle Inventory Dataset Development Strategy. My name's Jeffrey Guest. I'm a research officer at the National Research Council of Canada, and I'm the technical lead for this initiative. And alongside me is Rob Cooney, and he's the project manager for this initiative. So the outline for this presentation will be to give a brief overview of the initiative and then dive more deeply into our LCI dataset development scope and strategy, and then end with some concluding remarks. So this initiative, the LCA Squared, is born out of already existing federal climate change commitments and largely driven by the Treasury Board Secretariat's Center of Greening Government, where they have a host of policies and strategies on adapting to climate change and also mitigating GHG emissions throughout various aspects of government operations, including real property investments and fleet. And so our main focus is to do with real property investments and bringing in the component of embodied impacts or embodied carbon, while also considering operational GHG reductions as well. And here, as you see here, are some key documentations to do with our commitments to fighting climate change. So this is just a brief overview of the main elements of this initiative. So our main deliverables are to do with developing key technical infrastructure, and this includes developing a host of lifecycle inventory data sets to be integrated into a database. Also developing whole building LCA guidelines and other guidelines to do with implementing LCA into the procurement decision-making process, working with tool providers and or improving existing tools or developing new tools, and also working with the market integration aspects to ensure that the technical deliverables that we develop actually get utilized and adopted by a wider market, and also by procuring bodies at various jurisdictional levels. Starting with at the federal level, we're planning to undertake a number of case studies and pilot projects. As well, we have a research component that focuses on filling key methodological gaps, or at least addressing them in some ways, and also addressing key gaps in data set development where it makes more sense to develop models and broader approaches to data development. So the main vision of LCA Square is to develop and enable a Canadian lifecycle inventory database. That's its foundation. And also develop LCA and LCCA guidelines to enable not only the public, but also the private sector to incorporate the quantification of life cycle carbon and total cost of ownership of built assets into their procurement processes. So essentially, in a nutshell, we want to see LCA and LCCA used in procurement decision-making of all, or at least large projects across Canada. So here's a conceptual overview of the initiative. It really is driven by the left component with procurement, where key low carbon specifications will be written into requests for proposals, and then those projects will be bidded upon by various users like project bidders, architects, engineers, and LCA practitioners supporting those project bids, and they in turn are reliant on LCA tools. And those tools are, again, in turn reliant on existing data sets, whether they be from background databases or environmental product declarations. And to support all that, we need guidelines. So we're undertaking development of whole building LCA guidelines and also LCCA guidelines, and also specific criteria for tools. And also we're under developing guidance on procurement as well, on how to actually implement this. And then below all that is the research component, where it really just supports everything else where needed. Here's another overview with a little bit more verbiage when it comes to the key linkages of the key project pillars of the initiative. So the main objectives of this consortium over the next 4 years is to establish a national Canadian LCI database, develop high quality LCI data sets, establish guidelines for LCA, and integrate EPDs where possible, conduct a number of pilot projects, and develop a suite of communication products to ensure a high adoption rate. So what we've done to ensure our success is we've built out this consortium with a governance structure that looks as follows. So we have a steering committee made up of both funders and advisors, expert advisors. And then we also have a technical committee. And both of these committees are populated with a number of stakeholders from government, major material organizations, universities, consultants, architectural firms, etc., so that we're being all inclusive and bringing everyone to the table to ensure we enable a consensus-driven approach to bringing in low carbon decision making into procurement. And below that, we have project teams that will actually take out the tasks. And the role of NRC is really to spearhead the initiative and to manage and lead these committees and to ensure that all the deliverables are undertaken accordingly. So what we've landed on are 9 project pillars for the initiative, as you see here. And there's a number of connecting points. This isn't necessarily exhaustive, but this just gives you an idea of the main project buckets where projects will be undertaken and key deliverables will be developed. This slide gives you a little more detail on each of those 9 project pillars with some high-level objectives and also some linkage summaries in terms of how each project pillar links to one another. So really we're taking 2 technical approaches when it comes to implementing LCA and LCCA into procurement decision-making. So we're taking a more holistic approach through whole building lifecycle assessment, but also a material-specific approach where we focus on one or several materials in isolation and focus only on lowering the impact or lowering the carbon of that particular material without comparing it to any other materials or from a holistic design perspective. Now, ideally, we want to get to this whole building LCA approach, but this will take some time, and we feel that there's some quicker wins gained through a material specific approach where it's a little bit more simplistic in focusing on one material and putting targets on just a single material. But nevertheless, there is an integration point where we can actually utilize product-specific declarations within a whole building LCA approach so that we can put a more specialized target or enable the ability to allow suppliers to do such things as environmental product declarations and bring them into this decision-making process from a holistic approach as well. So the main functions of our technical committee are to review, refine, and recommend the scope of work and specific projects that should be undertaken within the initiative. It's here where we make important decisions on modeling assumptions, methodologies, scope of work, etc. And really, it's just to attend the meetings where your area of expertise or interest resides. You can play a very active role, or you can play a more of an observational role, but this technical committee is really open to anyone who wants to join. So you're welcome to join our technical committee if you're interested in what we're up to. And we strive to take this 5-step approach, excuse me, when making decisions about whatever key aspects, like what database we're going to integrate our data sets with, how do we quantify biogenic carbon dynamics or carbonation from a whole building perspective, dealing with end-of-life issues or allocation issues, anything really where there's some challenging decisions to make, we bring it to the technical committee and we go through these 5 steps to drive a consensus on how to go forward with whatever topic it may be. And when it comes to our LCI dataset development goals, it's really about continuing toward the goal of a robust pan-Canadian lifecycle inventory database for all purposes. And because we're not starting from scratch, actually, there's already been a very successful Quebec LCI dataset development campaign undertaken a few years ago, and we want to lead off from there which has already been established. And so therefore we decided to integrate our data sets with ecoinvent to build off of what has already been developed. But the main scope of this initiative from now until 2023 is to focus on building materials and their key supply chain activities. And the main building assembly of scope that we're looking at is the structural envelope and key finishing materials. However, this database, we hope we hope will continue to grow and include ultimately any other value chains in our economy. And ecoinvent, again, is a good database for that because it encompasses all economic sectors, or at least strives to do so. And the primary focus on the Canadian specific activities is at the provincial, territorial / industry average level and at gate-to-gate resolution. So that's the target in terms of when we go out and develop data sets. That's the spatial resolution that we're after. So there's still a number of question marks that we're working with our technical committee to figure out, and it's really to do with the role government should play in the data set development throughout this initiative. And so there's a lot of question marks, but we're slowly getting those answers through that consensus-driven approach. And this diagram simply shows you a simple flow of how data sets will be developed and integrated into ecoinvent, and then later disseminated for utilization in various LCA tools and ultimately procurement decision-making processes. So one aspect that we're looking to harness is the leveraging of data from existing and future environmental product declarations. There are already a number of EPDs representing Canadian activities and beyond. And so what we want to do is work with these EPD owners and the ones who develop the EPDs to actually use the data behind those reports to develop these provincial average data sets. And we want to strive to go beyond the typical EPD generation workflow, which is relatively isolating and not necessarily it doesn't necessarily leverage the data in an EPD as well as it could. We believe that all data in EPDs should be centralized so that it can be used for development of a national database or ultimately a global lifecycle inventory database. And so that's what these diagrams depict here. When it comes to actually going out and developing data sets, we're ultimately needing to put them into the EcoSPOL 2 format, which is the current ecoinvent dataset format. And these are some potential workflows. The first one, or P2, is the traditional one where you use EcoEditor, but now ecoinvent also has a new approach where they have this online application that enables you to develop data in an Excel environment. And then the third one, there's still a question mark around it because of conversion issues, but there's another approach could be to develop data sets in Open LCA and then convert them to EcoSPOL to be submitted to ecoinvent. We're having some conversations on how to close that conversion gap. So it could be a bit of a more user-friendly workflow, and it enables dataset developers to do that gut check before actually submitting the data sets to ecoinvent, because they could run the results in Open LCA, and once they feel good about those results, then they can submit them to ecoinvent. Otherwise, you're kind of left in the dark of what the results are actually going to be, and they're tested out at a later step on ecoinvent's side. But for now, the recommended pathway is to use this new online application that ecoinvent's developed. And on this next slide, these are essentially the steps that need to be taken to develop a data set. And so there is a website you can go to get access to that online application that ecoinvent provides, and anyone can register and anyone can submit data sets. So it's a bit more of a streamlined way. The thing that we like about it is that you can enter a whole host of data sets into a single Excel sheet in a relatively fast and automated way. So it's a nice way to batch develop data sets that are very similar. For example, if you want to develop 100 concrete data sets with slightly varying inputs and regional specificity, well, then you could do it in a single Excel sheet, just changing the parameters that you need to change quite fast. So it caters to a more automated or quicker workflow, we think. In terms of dataset prioritization, we've been working with CIREG at Polytechnique, with the main aim was to develop an initial set of prioritized datasets to develop over the next 3 years. And we've broken that down into 11 categories, as you see here: cement, aluminum, steel, wood, etc., covering that building scope that I mentioned earlier, meaning the structural envelope and key finishing materials. So each of these reports identifies the main products along the supply chain. They undertook some preliminary contribution analysis to better understand where the major hotspots are, and that gives us a sense of which data sets we should strive to develop in what order. They also went out to do a massive literature review of where the data sets exist that aren't yet in ecoinvent but could be utilized to develop robust Canadian data sets. And so all this is compiled into a report, and then also an explicit list of existing data and what needs to be developed. From there, our plan, so the dataset development approach is to first disseminate these reports that have been developed, and then review each report and present the findings of each report in a technical committee meeting for each material category. We'll discuss the data development opportunities at the TC meeting. We'll present the findings, recommendations, discuss any concerns and recommendations with experts from both industry and from universities and consultancies. And then from there, we'll package all these resources into a RFP, and we will then go on to procure the data sets for each material category in discrete projects. That's about it that I wanted to say today. So I'll end it right there. If you have any interest in what we're up to, or you want to get involved with this initiative, don't hesitate to email me at jeffrey.guest@nrc-cnrc.gc.ca. So thank you so much.